I have to say, not to be a big nerd, but the first thing that I said to somebody after I left the theater when I watched this movie, I was like, the adaptation is kind of next level. I had no idea what you guys are going to do with it because I'm a huge fan of the show.
Oh, cool.
It like exceeded my expectations. I watched it again last night. I was a
Aw.
huge, ugly crying puddle again. So
That's
thank you.
very nice to hear. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Um, I wanted to ask about the first line of the entire movie,
Hmm.
and I don't know why it stuck out to me, but the first line that Andrew says is, "Hi, I'm John." And I was sort of struck by the simplicity of that when he is such a figure who, if you know musical theater, it's sort of like
Hmm.
he's a titan, even though he only wrote a handful of shows. And I feel like just him saying those simple words grounds it even more. What can you tell me about like introducing a sort of like famous person like this so simply?
Yeah. Well, it's such a good question. And one of the first things I learned about Jonathan Larson, like that I didn't know as a huge Rent fan, a huge Tick Tick Boom
Mm-hmm.
fan, but coming onto this project, that was sort of all the knowledge I had was just as a fan.
Yeah.
And starting to talk to his friends, and especially his sister Julie, who said to me the first time we met, everybody always talks about Jonathan Larson, and I don't know who that is because my brother was John.
Mm-hmm.
Like Jonathan was his professional name, in the same way that people, Stephen Sondheim was Steve. Like, so if
Yeah.
you knew him, it was always Steve.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something about Jonathan Larson is a brand name that we all know, but he wasn't always Jonathan Larson, and he
Yeah.
never was during his lifetime. He was
Mhm.
John.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I do like the casualness of that opening and feeling
Mm-hmm.
like this is not going to be uh, this is not going to be this heroic story. This is John's story.
Yeah. Okay. Um, even hearing you just even say the fact that we're talking about John or Jonathan Larson or Steve and Stephen Sondheim in
Yeah.
one conversation, it's sort of like I even though I know what happens in Tick Tick Boom and I know what happens in the movie, I was not prepared for a lot of a lot of emotions to come out again the second time I watched it after.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I think that you know, Stephen Sondheim, because I did not know him personally.
Mm-hmm.
His his death was obviously a huge blow to all of us in the theater community and people that love theater in general. And one thing that I think, really bring out that John's version of Steve, which is really what we're showing, also brought out is what a huge mentor figure he was for so many people. Like that's what you've seen so much in the wake of his
Mm-hmm.
death, people stepping forward and saying, he wrote me a letter in a time when I
Yeah.
needed it, or he listened to my tape. Like he listened to so many people's tapes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm happy that this story is out there, and that this titan of musical theater was also somebody who really took the time to nurture the next generation.
Yeah. I think the nurturing quality, the movie really puts in the forefront between Jonathan and Stephen, and in a way, obviously with Lin-Manuel sort of in there too. It's sort of um in a weird way like vibrated almost more when I watched it again. It's sort of like a really strong testament of how collaborative and nurturing the community is, when a lot of people just think it's like Broadway. It's like, big business, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk about the structure, because I feel what is so brilliant about the adaptation is it sort of sneakily smashes two versions together, kind of like we have John telling the story, but then we're watching the story. How do you sort of navigate that and know when to pull back to John at the mic? I was so impressed with how seamless it weaves in and out with each other.
Oh, thank you. It was
Yeah.
the very first meeting I had with with Lin, he said, I want to go back to the solo show, which is where it all began. John, doing this show himself, going back to that, and that somehow being the spine of the film. And he talked about the very first time we met about all that jazz and the end of that movie where you see the audience.
Yeah.
And the audience is all the people who have loved him and been a part of his life throughout the story. And Lin felt like that was the way this story wants to end, is you see the audience and you see those people who've been part of his life. So we kind of had that as our touchstone. And the other thing we talked about from the beginning was that every contemporary movie musical needs some conceit of why people are singing and how people are singing. Like, we just won't accept the way that you used to in a movie, at least, that somebody just bursts into song. You have to have some kind of language for it.
Yeah.
And we felt like the concert is going to be our key to that. And so the concert is going to be what allows us to get into song, and what allows us, I think, by extension, to get into his imagination. So he's telling the story is unfolding. And because it all comes back to this concert, in a way, everything you're seeing is always filtered through his imagination. Like that it's mediated by John, the storyteller, which I think gives us permission to then have that story that unfolds in the real world still have this really heightened quality and still be able to have people burst into song, because it's all still within the world of the concert, which you hopefully realize at the end when you finally see for the first time that poster in the door that says "Tick Tick Boom, One Night Only," and you realize, oh, this has been Tick Tick Boom. That's what I've been watching. Is the next one that he wrote.
Okay. Yeah, I like how emotionally present and how confidently it's threaded through one to the other. Like, just thinking of Andrew telling the story of how Jonathan and Michael grew up together, and you sort of see it on an emotional level, and then you sort of see Jonathan telling about it on an emotional level, and they don't fight each other. They work very harmoniously together. And actually hearing you say, like, we need a conceit to hear why people are like bursting into song, that reminds me of like when everyone was talking about like Chicago, the unfilmable musical. How do we do it?
That Chicago was an example that we talked about a lot. They came up with a concept. You have to have some kind of concept.
Yeah. Okay. I actually told someone the other day, they're like, I don't understand why they did it that way. And I was like, oh, you need to see the original show and see how they created that, because that's like kind of crazy. I wanted to ask how you talked about bringing in some historical elements into the film, like when you see Jonathan on his bike and he sees the ACT UP posters. The Jesse Helms footage riles something up in me that is very primitive. I hate that man. And it's it's a time in history that we sort of cannot forget for its importance. We imagine how many people we lost, how many creative people we lost due to that. How did you sort of balance introducing that in a sort of non-hit you over the head kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted the AIDS crisis to be the backdrop of the story, and always there, because it was for John, and it was for John and his community, everybody around him. It was like the names. There's a moment in the film where he talks about the friends that he's lost, and he names them, and those are real people that John lost. Like, he had so many people in his life that he lost, as did everyone who worked in the theater. And that fury, the same fury we're talking about feeling at that footage, it drove John. That is, you see that in Rent for sure. You see that in Tick Tick Boom, and you see that in letters that he wrote during his life, and in the actions that he took during his life, and helping his friends who were sick. And this ferocity, this ferocious anger at the world, and the fact that change wasn't happening, and also at the same time this realization that he's writing musicals, and like yes, that feels like I'm making change, but what if it isn't? What if I'm just wasting time instead of there's a real like sophisticated grappling with the complexity of that. I think sometimes artists can be too quick to say, well, my contribution is I make art, and that's the same thing. And it's like, it's not really the same thing.
Mhm.
Is it still valuable? Yes, but like, how is it valuable? Why is it valuable? And those are like the really hard, tricky
Yeah.
questions that we're all still grappling with, that John was really consumed by.
Mhm. And there's sort of a, even if, say, he writes the most brilliant song and then encapsulates, the feelings of horror of that time period. I mean, art has to be received and it has to be thought upon and it has to evolve. So I completely sort of I sort of get that
Yeah.
point that you were just making. Um, I was curious. This is going to be a silly question, but my editor wanted me to ask: did you write in how many cameos were in the Sunday sequence?
No,
Okay.
but we did. It was conceived that way from the beginning.
Yeah.
Was
Okay.
Lin is gonna call every person he knows and get them, call in every favor. That would be what this moment was. So we
Yeah.
knew that it would be populated somehow. But even in writing the scene, there were characters that we left sort of gender non-specific and age non-specific,
Yeah.
specifically because we were like, let's see what Bernadette Peters wants to do, and let's see what Joel Grey wants to do. And that was the wish list, and it's a credit to Lin, of course, that we got the wish list,
Yeah.
especially in the middle of the pandemic. So
The amount of screaming that went on in just my section of the theater. Me and my husband were both like, ah, every single time. And I think the woman like 3 seats over had no idea
right.
what I was reacting to. And I think she hates me now, which is fine. um, I kind of wanted to ask about the sort of introduction to like the history of John's life in the beginning and the end. Like the movie is very straightforward in terms of this is Jonathan Larson's life. He died, and then we see that sort of at the beginning and more so at the end. Tell me about like the care of putting that in there.
Yeah, that was a really complicated thing, needle to thread, and something that Lin and I talked about a lot, and talked about with our editors and producer, and like everybody trying to figure out the proper balance of context and not wanting to overshare, but wanting to both to make sure that the audience, what we discovered is that an audience that knows the story and that knows that this character goes on to write Rent and goes on to die so young and so tragically just has a totally different experience of this story than someone who doesn't.
Yeah.
It just is totally different. And from our world, like we all know the story of Jonathan Larson. That myth is so gigantic, but most people don't. And
Yeah.
it felt important to ground it somehow in, this is a guy who's going to go on to change the world, and someone who is lost too early, and not really saying much more than that. But then in the end, we did want to make clear what happened, and what we didn't want to do is, we were both, Lin and I didn't want to just do like a kind of black screen with white text saying it. Like we wanted to try to figure out a way to put it in the film that felt elegant. And so we liked this idea of it being Susan's voice.
Oh yeah.
Introducing it in both places, because that's a character for whom you can imagine there being, I mean, it's a tremendous loss for her, and just the gaping wound that must have left in her life. And yeah, it felt important to us. And it also kind of is another frame on the film, like it kind of puts it one step even further removed, in a way that felt interesting to us.
Even though I know that she is watching from the back of the theater, the shot of like him looking at the empty chair with her name on it is so devastating.
I know.
And it's sort of like, I thought about it more the second time that I watched it, like how much his death must have affected her, and how I can't imagine what, the complicated feelings there. So I'm glad you said that. And the whole time I'm watching it, it's just like, okay, that was 1990. Imagine if it was 2021. Just imagine the sort of like gifts he could have given us. I guess one last question before I let you go. You adapted Dear Evan Hansen. I know, I'm not sure if this is still happening, Fiddler on the Roof.
I'm hoping.
Hoping, yeah.
Hoping,
okay.
hoping. Yeah.
I'm seeing a national tour on Saturday, so I'm very much in much in the Fiddler train right now. But I was curious, like, if you could adapt any musical for the big screen, what would it be? I would like to maybe suggest, I need Toni Collette in Next to Normal, and I love the musical A New Brain. It's my favorite musical.
Yeah.
But I'm just throwing those out there. If you could tell me what maybe you would want to
see.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good and hard question. The one that comes, I mean, I was like, my favorite musical in the world is Cabaret, which is also one of my favorite films. So I don't think I would suggest that, even though that's what comes to mind. I'm like, I don't think you want to compete with that movie.
Well, I mean, a lot of people were saying like, you shouldn't, like, why are we remaking West Side Story? And that script is brilliant too. And it's like,
no, I think if you can reimagine, then it is something else.
And musicals can get revived all the time. So if you want to do Cabaret, you can do Cabaret.
Totally. I do love that show. And I don't know. It's a great question. That is the one that comes to mind, and also the one that I go, who would be stupid enough to try to But I would have said that about West Side Story, and then if you had told me, well, Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner, I would say, okay.
You're like, right.
Yes, I get it.
Okay.
I'm very interested in that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm just like, that movie like reaches out and like clutches my heart, and I think it's really beautiful, and I think it's a beautiful homage. So thank you so much for your time, and good luck to you this season.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Have a good day.
Thank you.